So Corie Rosen is a fiction writer and poet. She grew up in the greater Los Angeles area and attended UC Berkeley. At Berkeley, she studied with MacArthur Genius and Pulitzer Prize nominee Ishmael Reed, who told her she was among the very best young writers he had ever encountered. Her poem, Madonna for the Damned, a meditation on cultural iconography, has been anthologized multiple times, featured is included high school and college curricula. Her short fiction has also been anthologized and taught. She's been a finalist for the Raymond Carver Short Story Prize and for the Catherine Ann Porter Prize for Fiction. Has also been nominated for the Pushcart Prize. A former member of the faculties at Arizona State University and the University of Colorado, she spent 10 years teaching writing in law schools. As a professor, she frequently addressed groups that numbered into the hundreds and has given dozens of talks across the United States and Europe. Currently, she's a member of the Lighthouse Writers Workshop and reads fiction and poetry for the North American Review and Salamander magazine. Her short book of poems, Words for Things Left Unsaid, was published by Aldrich Press in 2020. Corie?
Hi, that was horrifying. You're right, bios can be extremely strange, but thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I know so many of you, and I'm a longtime Lighthouser, and I miss everyone a lot. So it's just wonderful to be with you online because we can't be together in person. So I've written this book of poetry, which there's this concept in psychology called productive procrastination, where instead of doing the project that you're supposed to be doing, you do a different project, but you come out with an equal to or perhaps even better result. And that was this experience for me. So I wrote this while I was working on a novel that you will notice I am not reading from. But I will read to you a few of the pieces from this book and talk to you a little bit about its generation and hopefully get a chance to chat with everyone because we're not able to get together at Lighthouse in person. And for folks who aren't Lighthousers, I know I invited some people from outside the Lighthouse community who have very generously joined us. You can see the house that Manuel is standing in front of is this beautiful Victorian mansion that is the literary heart of Denver in so many ways and a place that I love and miss dearly. So here we are in the online version. So I'm going to read to you a few pieces from the book. And I wrote the book. The book is a short story, essentially, in poems. So it's an interconnected series of narrative and semi-narrative pieces that detail what is meant to be one relationship, but draws on moments and pieces of the lives of a couple over a long period of time. And I'm really focused on and interested in, I think, how poetry is different from fiction, what it can do that fiction can't do, and vice versa. So this is the first piece in the book. It's called Crossroad, and it attempts, I think, to invite the reader in to share some of those questions with the speaker in the book. With you now, I arrive at the place where, once reached, I must, or at least have already begun, to say the things I'd promised I'd keep sealed inside myself. Words that rise from the dust-rimmed pavement, flotsam that drifts from the curbside. Words meant to be held beneath the closed jar's lid. It is too soon to say how I loved you, love you, will love you all over again in whatever that word's strained future tense may be. But, as I think I've already mentioned, I am not going to say this. Anyway, it is too soon for those sorts of declarations. Yet he had already arrived on this corner, and standing now, so still together, there are all these things that must be said. So that was Crossroad, and I'm going to move in the text quite a bit forward here. So the story of these people is a story that's being told in retrospect. The speaker is trying to make sense of events of the past to understand how the speaker has arrived at the place that we learn she arrived at the end. And so this is from the middle section of the book. It's called Life from Bone. All day long, the wrestles daily. Because the mirror reflects the room back and doubles the gleam of this place called home. But after all, is only an object. It cannot decide where the light should wander or where it should remain. And so the gray sofa sits, passive and clasping. Its threads have a sheen, fixed but optimistic. It is waiting for someone else to come along and tell it what it means. Alone, I lean over its gray back, reach to open the window. I turn with force the old slow crank. Outside, the afternoon begins to settle. In the yard, the breeze mumbles through piles of dry leaves. Even here, where you never were, the air has learned the syllables of your absence. Somehow I have taught this room to hum the music of your name. Later, I work slowly, preparing chicken. It is obscene, this, slipping skin from flesh, pulling life from bone, all hope truant. My hands move through the air that is your lack. I thought I was finished with this sad world. I thought I was home preparing chicken. I work and remember the tanned lines of your body, neck, feet, hips, your sideways smile. Maybe where you sit in your office or on your own sofa, with others or even alone, maybe. You imagine the gold light of this kitchen, the smell of chicken roasting, expertly, murderously, as it is just now. Outside, the trees in my yard are awake to their fall burning. Palms open, they cast down leaves like lost lovers' hands. Toss all you want, I say. It won't help you. Though the trees, conscious of their mortality, decline to hear what I have to say. The trees know even less than the sofa. They do not realize the way a room can hold your scent, even if you've never been here. The way the fog traces your name long after you have gone. So that was Life from Bone from the middle of this book. And I should say, and I think I said in the interview I did with Rachel Weaver, that I had left my regular teaching job and planned to start a family. And that did not go exactly as planned. And so while I was writing this book, I was trying to bring my daughter into the world. And it was a challenging experience. And so some of this book is a meditation on things and people that are missing. And that meditation took sort of an unexpected and unusual form. And I found that it was impossible to write directly. It's like trying to write, at least for me, like trying to write about the political moment we're in right now. Like I can't just sit down and talk about it in a way that is beautiful and coherent and compelling. I find that I have to write about sort of everyday things. And so one of the goals of this book was to try to get at a common but painful experience and to defamiliarize some of the ideas of missing someone or missing someone you don't even know and what that experience is like. And so the narrative arc of the book tracks this relationship, but I hope beneath the language on the page, there is this second story. So I'm going to skip forward and I'm actually going to skip back. The book went through 6 editorial rounds with the editors at the publisher. And now I wonder if maybe it should have gone through a 7th, but here I am skipping forward. This is a piece called A Definition in the End. In the kitchen, she said, "That's it, we're through, finished." He said, "Life is not a movie, even if you'd like it to be." He said, "This is our story. There is no neat ending." "Go on then," she said. "I dare you." "Go on, please just do it." He said, "The way you talk about it, there's the trouble." She said, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." She said, "All my life, I thought violence was just another word for love." And I wanted to read that because it was the piece when I was writing this book that totally surprised me and seemed to come from a completely unforced place, and is, in a way that I don't even know that I fully understand, at the heart of what I was attempting to write about. So I don't want to go over my time, so I'll read you one more piece. This is called Dinosaur Bones. I first published this when I didn't realize this was going to take shape into a book. I actually had thought originally I was writing like this political book about Trump's election and the failure of language and the evolution of this moment we found ourselves in and the way words were working. And then I kind of fell into this much more personal and more narrative style of writing that resulted in this project. So this is a piece I wrote really, really early when I didn't realize how things were going to fit together. And it appeared in a small journal called the Triggerfish Critical Review. And I just want to plug them because they have such a cool model. So the way they work is if they accept a piece, they take pieces that they feel have like complex literary merit, something to digest and talk about. And then before the issue appears, they send all of the accepted poems out to the other poets. And then you have an opportunity to write a critical essay dissecting and getting at the heart of one of the poems. So it's a really neat way, particularly now, to build community, to get to know other poets, and also to have other writers who in some ways can be, I think, smarter than you are, smarter than your work is when it belongs to you, help you see what the literary moves are that the pieces are making and how they're operating within themselves. So this is Dinosaur Bones. My niece, who is 3, is twirling in a sparkly dress, her favorite Hello Kitty gown. She moves jerking across the brown expanse of the kitchen. I think she is probably the same age as your daughter, though it has been many years since I have seen you, and I do not know for sure. She is blonde and holds a book about how dinosaurs clean their rooms. Later, I will read it to her on the sofa while she squirms, a little child in a large bed, still and new and smooth, that warm little body, curling with innocence, with expectation and heat. On campus, there was a bright atrium, green windows and walls like white columns. At the pale high center, the preserved skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. I remember how the predator's hull hung shuddering from the ceiling, taking up all the light and air, this dead thing still powerful at the center of the room. I used to visit that tall body, though I was not a science student and the hall was a long way from the converted church where I studied dance. That ancient skeleton held a memory of a memory, the bloody taste my own evolution had buried, a memory of a time before man and daylight mammals were mud-colored and invented in the way that they are now. It was only this, a vast arc of raw hunger, a high-necked form of predatory leg and bone. At school, I'd studied you also, the winding pattern of the cream you swirled into your coffee, the dirty leaf smell of your late-night breath. A scientist might have told how electrons spilled from the tips of your fingers, how it was particles of you that made the charge across my skin. Then there were the soft-aired afternoons when I slipped silently across campus, searching for you in the smell of the wet grass, in the hum of the creek, in the damp stretch of the afternoon pavement, on those rainy afternoons when I went hunting dinosaur bones. So that was Dinosaur Bones. It appears toward the end of this collection. And I decided not to read from the last set of pieces, so you don't know exactly what happens to these folks, and hopefully we'll read the book to find out. That is, I believe, my time. I don't want to go over, but I'm happy to answer any questions and just to chat. And it's so nice to see you guys and so many familiar faces. So thank you for joining me and supporting the book. And that's my time, I think.
Thank you, Corie. I really appreciate that. That was wonderful. And our next reader, and so we'll have a Q&A following our next reader, and our next reader is, and you may have heard Mathangi read with us, was it a month or two ago? I can't remember quite, but Bethunki Subramanian is an award-winning Indian-American writer, author, and educator. She's a graduate of Brown University and the Teachers College of Columbia University, and the recipient of a Fulbright, as well as other fellowships. Her writing has previously appeared in the Washington Post, Quartz, Al Jazeera America, and elsewhere. Her first work of fiction, A People's History of Heaven, published earlier this year by Quinn Books. Mathangi?
Hi, everybody. Sorry, Manuel, I couldn't hear your audio, so I got a little taken by surprise there, but my face is on my screen, so I think it's my time now. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Corie. I'm so excited to share this virtual space with you. As Manuel said, I just moved to Denver, and I'm really excited to be part of the Lighthouse community. Even though I haven't met anyone in person, I feel very embraced by everybody, so thank you for that. So today I'm reading from my book, A People's History of Heaven, which came out last year, which is very lucky because it came out in March. And if it had come out in March of this year, I wouldn't have gotten to do a lot of the cool things I got to do. So this book is the story of 5 girls growing up in Islam in Bangalore that is about to be destroyed. And since the book is about stolen land, I always start my readings with a land acknowledgement. So I just want to acknowledge that here in Denver, where I am and where the Lighthouse Writers Workshop is, we are on the unceded ancestral traditional territory of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Sioux people. So today is also coincidentally India's Independence Day, and this book takes place in Bangalore, which is in India. And India is currently under the control of a man who is interested in stamping out any kind of diversity or equity, which might sound familiar to some of you. So today what I thought I would do is read some of the characters from my book who represent parts of India that you may not have seen and that are currently actually being persecuted pretty actively by the government. I think one of India's strengths, like America's strengths, is that it's an incredibly diverse place. And this book is a celebration of that diversity and a celebration of India's women. So I'm going to start with the Joy. Joy is kind of the leader of this group of 5 girls, but she's very different from all of them. I mean, they're all very different from each other, but I'm just going to read so you can sort of see a little bit about Joy's history. Joy is the girl you can't miss. Eyes large as a calf's, long lashed in velvet, hips like palm fronds that billow and sway. Hair black and glittery, like a strip torn off of midnight's double color sky. Joy, the girl of our dreams, our unofficial queen. Now that is, back in Fort Standard, Joy wasn't Joy at all. She was Anand. Anand was never like his brothers. Grew his hair long enough to pin it back with garlands of orange and white jasmine. Made perfectly round chapatis, copying the movements of his mother's quick, sure wrists. Stole his mother's coal and painted his eyes like a film star's. At school, we girls didn't care much about what Anand thinks he is or isn't. Even when his braids and his makeup, Anand is much more sensible than Yusuf or Bihan or any of the other boys we know. Besides, he's promised that after he learns how to do threading, he'll sculpt all of our eyebrows for free. In the mornings when we're walking to school, Yusuf runs behind us and pulls the ribbons tied around Anand's plaits. Won't give them back unless Anand catches him. Idiot, Anand said. government blue ribbon safely back in his hands. If you're gonna be a girl like us, then you better get used to it, Rukshana says. I'm not going to be a girl like you, Anand says. I already am a girl like you, just in the wrong shape. Yusuf seems to like your shape just fine, Rukshana says. Anand's mother, Selvi Auntie, is not like the rest of our mothers. Selvi Auntie is from a district in Tamil Nadu that we always misspell on our geography tests, a place where people speak a language as cratered as the studs they wear on both sides of their noses. Anand doesn't have a father, or at least a father who's around to protect the house and yell at his wife and do all the other things that fathers are supposed to do. Unlike our fathers, though, Anand's father did not abandon Selvi Auntie for a peg of liquor or a younger woman. Anand's father died in a construction accident, which, after the insurance payments, left Selvi Auntie with two precious things, money and dignity. But here is the biggest difference of all. Selvi Auntie gave birth to no daughters and 4 sons. No one criticizes her lazy womb. No one blames her unclean habits, her unpure heart. No one whispers that her husband is a saint for putting up with this useless lady uselessly bringing more and more useless girls into the useless world. Selvi Auntie knows that by the standards of heaven, she is lucky. Mostly she's grateful, but sometimes, secretly, she wishes she was just a bit unlucky. Not unlucky enough to be married to a drunk or to be unemployed or homeless. Just lucky enough to have a daughter. So when Anand learns how to blow the skin off the milk in one perfect breath, to plait his growing hair into coconut-oiled ropes, to keep his face still, his eyes forward, ignoring catcalls and marriage proposals and accidental on-purpose touches, Selvi Auntie knows she should stop him. She knows she should remind him that he is a boy who will one day be a man, who will one day be married to a woman he may or may not abandon. But she can't help but think that maybe, just maybe, the gods and goddesses have heard her. Maybe, just maybe, she will be lucky one more time. So that's Joy and Selvi Auntie. And I actually wrote this book while I was on a Fulbright in Bangalore. And I was researching early childhood education centers because by background I'm an educator. And what I didn't realize when I started my research is that these centers were some of the only places where poor Indian women could gather freely and in public, particularly in the south of India where I'm from and where I was doing my research. So I went into these sites to do academic research, but I was suddenly surrounded by all of these voices and women who I had never encountered in my past trips to India, although I had only been to India 2 or 3 times before I moved there, even though my family is from there. So the child who inspired Joy was actually a little boy who used to come to school every day in skirts and wearing eyeliner. And the teachers used to love him and think that he was adorable. And I started to wonder about sort of where is the line between when a child is adorable for playing with gender and the line when it becomes a problem. And so that was sort of the inspiration for Joy's character. And Joy is very heavily researched, which if people are interested about trans lives in India, that's something I could definitely talk about in Q&A. So the next character I wanted to read you is Rukshana, who is a Muslim girl who's part of the group, and she's a tomboy, as you'll see in this segment. So she is, in this segment, she's just returning from a time in the village where she had lice and they shaved her head. And so nobody knew if she was a boy or a girl, so she got to actually act like a boy. And now she's back in Bangalore and the rules are they're trying to apply the rules to her again. And she's not happy about it. Okay. All right, so this is Rukshana. Rukshana may have forgotten that she was a girl, but back in Bangalore, the whole city is ready to remind her. When she tries to sneak away with Vihan and Yusuf and the other boys in the afternoons, one of our mothers always catches her. Hey, Rukshana, naughty girl, what do you think you're doing, they say. Go home and help her mother. You help her, Rukshana says. I want to play. You want us to help her? Our mothers say. Oh, that's a good one. If we help, who will make dinner and do the wash and sweep the floor at our house? Who will do the dishes and make sure that all the children come home? You mean the boy children? Rukshana says. By the time she finishes arguing, Vihan and Yusuf are already gone. There's nothing left for Rukshana to do except drag herself home. She tries to pretend that washing the dishes in buckets of soapy water is the same as catching water bugs in the river, that making the dough for rotis is the same as splashing in the mud. The work is bad, but the rules are worse, Rukshana grumbles, imitating our teachers, our mothers. Keep your knees together when you sit. It's so sunny. Take an umbrella so you won't get dark. No, don't speak up. Just do as you're told. It's the way things are, Padma says. Might as well accept them. Plus, it's better than being a boy, Joy adds. Is it though? Rukshana asks. Things get worse in 6th standard when Rukshana's body begins to bubble and rise. Every day there is some new bulge to deal with, some unexpected change. In the winter, Fatima Auntie pulls Rukshana out of school to go back to the village to help with a family wedding. On the walk from the bus stop to the farm, Rukshana feels her legs and arms and stomach and heart coiled and ready. Her braid swings back and forth, like even her hair cannot contain its pent-up energy. But when she gets to the farm, instead of sending her out into the field, Fatima Auntie hands her a bowl full of unshelled peas. Do these, she says. Rukshana, too shocked to reply, looks up at her mother with round tamarind pod eyes. Don't worry, Fatima Auntie says. Just as Rukshana is relaxing, she adds, I'll get you some chai to keep you awake after the ride. Rukshana does her work beneath a tree whose high branches used to be her favorite hiding place. Now, even in its shade, she feels cruelly exposed. While she works, she watches the younger boys play cricket and fight kites and catch fat black horseflies with their bare hands, watches the older boys leave the house on bicycles and two-wheelers, smelling like cheap body spray, watches them come back smelling like wind and music and other people's cigarettes. The day before the wedding, Rukshana's mother brings her a piece of black cotton and a set of pins, holds the fabric across her palms like a dagger. It's not just us, you know, she tells Rukshana. These Marathis, they're Hindu, and they cover using the ends of their saris. And I read somewhere that some Jews do also in America. Why? Because it makes them part of something bigger, and it makes them brave, sets them free. Makes them brave? Rukshana repeats, sets them free? When I cover, I am more than myself. I am all the hijabis who covered before me. I am the ones who cover now. So all the things the world wants me to do, wants me to be, that men want me to be and do, I don't have to be any of them. I don't have to do any of them. Because I'm not just myself. I'm more than myself. I'm everyone. And that's what makes me brave and free. I already know how to be brave, Rukshana says, and she does. Fearlessness quivers inside of her like the pulled back string of a hunting bow. As long as she can remember, that's how it's been. Rukshana doesn't care about being any braver than she already is. What she cares about is being free. Not the kind of free Fatima Auntie wants. Rukshana wants not something more exactly, but something different. Bravery, she thinks, belongs to girls, but freedom to boys. So I'm just going to read one last quick section, but the inspiration for Rukshana and her mom, Fatima Auntie, is that when I was doing my fieldwork, I got kind of involved somehow in the preschool teachers union. So I went to a bunch of rallies and things with them, which, you know, everybody packed really great food and it was like a picnic basically in the park. And one of the leaders there was actually a hijabi woman, a Muslim woman who wore hijab. And to me, this felt like very normal, but I know to a lot of people who I knew in India, their idea of Muslim women was that they were very demure and they didn't really speak and they didn't really leave the house. And so Fatima Auntie is loosely based on this woman who was a union leader, and then her daughter Rukshana isn't really based on anything. She's just a Muslim girl who really wishes that she was a boy. So this last section that I'm going to read is about the teacher, the girl's teacher, Janaki ma'am, who becomes sort of something of like a hero in the book. And Janaki ma'am is actually based on several teachers that I met, including one headmistress, who, despite everything, was very dedicated to making the government school that she ran a great place for the kids who went there, which in India is very difficult because schools are extremely underfunded. One of the women that Janaki ma'am was inspired by lived in a slum where there was no running water or electricity, and she had built a school there and was trying to run it. But all of the children sort of saw her as this magical person, and so this is my imagined magical headmistress, Janaki Ma'am. In Bangalore, schools are run by men with mustaches like hairy caterpillars, bellies like rubbery balloons. They skim money off the textbook fund. That is, when they bother to check the budget. Stop by the building every now and then and curse the students in all of Bangalore's official and unofficial tongues. Our school is different. Our school is run by Janaki Ma'am, who is a headmistress, not a headmaster. Hair the color of wishes, eyes cut like broken stones. She knew our mothers and sometimes even our mothers' mothers. We know because she told us. She tells us other things too, when our mothers and our mothers' mothers aren't around and the boys aren't listening, which is most of the time. Truths flat and round that fit in your palm like a 5-rupee coin. They'll say you have to marry, but you don't. Truths that make our aunties cringe, our sisters giggle. See these? Put them in your underpants when you start to bleed, and stay away from boys, especially after the blood comes. Janaki Ma'am lives by herself in a flat with air conditioning in the bedroom and bookshelves in the hall. On certain puja days, not all of them, but some of them, she doesn't even pray. Instead, she takes a holiday, reads novels, makes chocolate cake in her pressure cooker. When she does laundry, she hangs her petticoats and bras on the clothesline right outside her balcony window, where everyone in the neighborhood can see. When we ask her about it, she says, they'll tell you secrets keep you safe. They're wrong. Nothing safe ever needs to be hidden, and nothing hidden is ever truly safe. We don't just listen to Janaki Ma'am, we watch her too. If we want something, we act like her, fold our arms and narrow our won't back down eyes, flash our give me money smiles. They'll say you can't have what you want, she tells us, but you can. When other people tell us, we don't believe them, but Janaki Ma'am, she makes us believe. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to start with the first question, and I'll give everybody a chance to think of some questions. I am really interested in just your process right now, especially what does your writing process look like, and what does it look like now with kind of constantly being in front of a screen or at home or all those things? And so Corie, Mathangi, whoever would like to start first.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead, Corie. I have to think about what I'm going to say, so you go ahead. But Manuel, is there any way you can put us like side by side on the screen? Because I can see my face like really huge. Is that possible?
Oh, now I see my face. I was seeing your face, but
okay. So it's all good, but you're answering, so that's all good.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know that we have the tech capabilities to do the side by side.
Okay, awesome.
So it'll just be spotlighting.
This is not the answer to your question, but I will answer this question. But a few nights ago, I had a dream that 3 other lighthousers and I broke into Lighthouse with Michael Henry in the middle of the night to have a group discussion about Tinkers by Paul Harding. Like, the dream was very specific. And in the dream, one of the people said to me, you know about COVID and we're risking our lives to be here. And somebody else said, yeah, but it's worth it. And I felt like that was my subconscious, like calling me back to Lighthouse and to writing in a really direct and focused way, which is something I've had a hard time doing. So I have a 9-month-old baby at home. And also my husband, who used to work in an office, now works from home, and I work part-time also for family business. I used to be a full-time educator, and I think that's probably the thread here between us, potentially. So one thing that happened to me, I think happened to a lot of writers who I know and talk to, which is that when the pandemic started, the world became so difficult to make sense of that at least most people I know stopped writing for a time and took a breath. And I had already been kind of doing that because I was getting up, every 3 hours and doing all the things that you do with a new baby. And then as things settled, I began to feel like pulled in two directions in a way that I am always pulled in two directions, the sort of practical and this is going to sound aggrandizing, but like the spiritual or the artistic. Because on the one hand, I thought, well, I should be out buying groceries for people who have a hard time getting to the grocery store. And yet, here I am trying to live my own life and just keep people alive and fed. And then turning in moments that surprised me to the work of other people. And so I came back to writing in this really immediate way through reading, because I found such an intense need. Like I'm reading a novel on my phone. I'm listening to an audiobook when I'm, cooking or doing things around my house. I'm reading poetry every chance I get. And so suddenly my world became this really housebound flood of words, other people's words. And that catapulted me out of not writing and got me writing again. I mean, for a while, I'd had some stuff that had been accepted. And so I was having to do editorial work, but that felt like business. So what I do now is my daughter takes a nap at 10 a.m. And at 10 a.m., regardless of what is happening, or if I am, wearing vomit in my hair or whatever is going on, at 10 a.m. when she goes to sleep, I sit down and I work. And I work until she wakes up. And sometimes that's just 50 minutes and sometimes it's 2 hours. And then I try to come back to whatever it is I'm working on at night when she goes to sleep. And that was not my process before. And it was not something, I used to get up in the morning and write first thing and write my 3 journal pages and do all the things that you're supposed to do, or that so many of us do. And I found that this works for me. I just dive right in. I'm working on, everyone will laugh, I'm working on a novel. And I also have another book of poems that I'm shopping right now. So I find that the need to do the work is more urgent now than it was before, because we're living in this time where I think there's always so much uncertainty in our lives, but we don't realize it because we are lulled by the machinations of the everyday, and things feel predictable to us because we know we're going to come home from work and make dinner and things will be as they were. And suddenly, the news itself is so terrifying. I have a lot of friends who practice medicine and are otherwise involved in fighting the pandemic directly. And the uncertainty that we're living with has pushed me to want to read and write and feel that it's necessary in a way that I didn't before. And it has been both terrifying and reassuring. One of my best friends practices medicine and may even be here with us. I don't know because I can't see everybody. And, she's sending me snippets from the Paris Review at midnight after her kids go to bed. Because that's a place that I think we can go for solace. So that was a bigger answer than I think you had, a bigger answer than the question that prompted it, if that's fair. But I've been thinking a lot about this, why are we doing this? If it's not feeding people or healing people in a tangible way, what is the benefit? I know there's a benefit because everyone I'm close to who loves this work is running to it for solace. And so I think if you're someone who's struggling with how to get back to the work, which I definitely have friends who I think, still are, I think reading is itself a kind of process. And that for me has been the journey back to being able to focus in a sustained way. So.
Thank you, Corie. Mathangi?
So I always try to be very clear and upfront with people that I consider myself a successful writer and a working writer, but I've never been able to sustain myself through my writing. So I have always had to fit writing into the rest of my life. So I wrote this book on weekends while I was working full time. So I've always sort of like, I've never really had a practice really. Right now, so I have a 4-year-old, and I've been home with her since we adopted her 4 years ago. So every stage of her life, I've had to change my process. Right now, I have been writing, but I've also been writing a lot for pay. Like I work for Sesame Street, and I write scripts for them, and I also write storybooks for them, and then I also write storybooks for like when your kid goes to the library and gets those early readers, like I write those for pay. So I've been doing a lot of that kind of work, and then trying to fit my book project in wherever I can. I'm very lucky because when we moved to Denver, we were able to fly my mom here because she was living by herself. So she watches my daughter now for a few hours a day. So I have about 3 hours of work time every day where I have to balance both my book project and my paid work. Another thing that I do is I get up really early. I get up at like 5:30, and I meditate in the mornings and exercise and read so that I'm like able to make it through the day. But honestly, my priority right now is parenting, because this is a really tough time for my kid and for my family. So if I parent well, I feel like it's a good day, and I try to give myself grace. So if I work on my book project for half an hour, then like that's a win. I have had a few breaks during the pandemic of like 2 or 3 weeks where I haven't been working on my book project at all, but that's been my whole life. So, because I've always had to fit writing in to the cracks of everything else. Like I say it's my job, but really it's like my third side hustle. So, so for me, I mean, there were a lot of other things that were really difficult during the pandemic for me and remain difficult. For example, I have a lot of family in India and they're not handling it well, and I'm not allowed to travel there. We can't bring anybody here. They can't apply for visas. So, you know, I find myself really concerned about very specific issues and people. And, you know, apparently the postal service is dying, so we can't vote in this election. And like, there's just like things happening every day. So I try to write when I can, and I try to give myself grace, and I try to do a lot of activism and a lot of parenting because that feels what's important to me. I think my book project is important too, and I think writing is important, but I think right now it's up to us to do what we can to survive. And so if there are any writers out there, I felt really good when I heard other authors say this at events, like if you're not writing, it's fine. If you are writing, it's fine. If you're writing 15 minutes a day, it's fine. If you're writing 2 hours a day, it's fine. If you can't sustain yourself through your writing, like welcome to the club, right? This is what making art is, because art isn't valued in the US and we're taught not to value our own art. Yeah, my usual process is to get like really immersed in a project, and then my stories come out of that. And also being at home right now, I'm writing memoir because there's nowhere to go and nothing to be immersed with except like my own story. So that's also hard because I'm not that interested in myself. To be honest, I'm much more interested in writing about other things and other people. Yeah, so that's kind of where I am with my process.
Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And there's a question for Corie, but I think for both of you, what kind of writer would you consider yourself? You know, they asked Corie, do you think of yourself primarily as a poet? And Mathangi, you know, your current work is fiction, but how would you define yourself and the work you're producing?
Well, in some ways I'd rather not, and in some ways it's a relief. So I think I was writing right along and actually having most of my biggest publishing successes are quite behind me now. I mean, I think hopefully there's some I'm looking forward to, but they were all in poetry and happened kind of close together in a way that surprised me. But I never thought of myself primarily as a poet because, Mathangi, you said something about how we're taught to devalue our own art. And I think that's such a like rich, complicated, fraught topic, not just for this community, but for communities everywhere. I had started out actually in the performing arts, and I wanted to go, when I was young, I wanted to go to a conservatory to write, to study dramatic writing. And of course, people I told that to said, what on earth would you do with dramatic writing? This is before the golden age of television and, Netflix churning out so much content that it takes more time to decide what to watch than to watch the thing. And I ended up not doing that. And I found my way into poetry by accident. And at Berkeley, when I was an undergraduate, Berkeley is such an incredible school, and like so many of the big universities in the United States, it offers the opportunity to study with truly extraordinary, at least like vetted in the culture kinds of poets. So I studied with Ishmael Reed, who is a mentor and friend of mine. And then I also had an opportunity to study with Bob Haas, who's just exceptionally famous. And I kind of started to think of myself as a poet when Bob told me, like, you're a poet. Because there was this sort of like being anointed from on high, like, oh, this is good, thing that maybe I needed to hear. But I really felt for the longest time that poetry was not where the culture was looking, and that to be relevant, you really had to write fiction. And then a poet friend of mine said recently, that is the funniest misconception, because like only a poet would write fiction to become successful. That, the world is not necessarily looking at poetry and fiction in this really delineated way that a lot of us are. And so I definitely think I've been more successful as a poet, maybe because it's a less crowded space and I love poetry. But I also think the two things really talk to each other. This morning I was reading, I'm reading all of Rebecca Mackay's work. So I think she's just really extraordinary. And so I'm going back and I'm reading The Borrower, which was her, I think, very first book. And she does this thing with scenes where she's able to condense things in an incredible way. And I think poetry is a lot about compression, successful poetry. And she had a line, I wish I had known I was going to be talking about it because I would have brought it in. There was a line about the main character is with a 10-year-old boy, and they're in a tiny Vermont town. And it's a snowy day, and they walk up like a road that's closed so that there's holiday shopping and the shoppers can move freely without cars. And she says, like, the street was lit by the colorful hats that people were wearing. And it is this fabulous, like, instant scene, instant, vivid, visual, visceral experience. And so the poetry is like living in the prose, and that's the kind of prose I really aspire to write. Most of the short stories and things I've published in journals have been with journals that have a focus on poetry and like work that has that kind of attention to the line, I think, within the narrative structure. So I aspire to be a poet who writes fiction as well, I guess, in a poetic form. Because I think if you, at least for me, when I start attuning my mind to poetry and just listening even to the way people talk, just natural speech, it all starts to assemble itself into like, well, this is iambic, and here's the phrase, and here's the line break. And poetry is a weird animal because it's meant to be read visually, but also to be heard. And in that way, I think it's distinct from fiction, although it sounds like, if you're reading and writing kids' books, maybe you have a sense of the way that things translate from the page into spoken language a little bit differently. I know I'm like not supposed to be asking questions, but I'd actually love to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Sorry, unmuting myself is like very complicated on my crowded table. Yeah, I love writing kids' books because they're meant to be read out loud. So I like read aloud to myself a lot on the computer. I'm definitely not a poet. Like I wish I was a poet. I love poetry. I love reading poetry, and I love writing poetry. But nothing I write is any good. Definitely. I've never been asked this question before, what kind of writer I am, and I think if I had to answer it, I think I would say that I'm a political writer. Like I'm a woman of color. I'm the mother, wife, and daughter of immigrants. I'm an adopted mother. I have dark skin. Like, I feel like whether I'm writing like a storybook or whether I'm writing fiction like I just wrote, or the memoir that I'm working on now, or even, you know, the scripts I do for Sesame Street are for their international productions, so I'm writing stuff for kids in refugee camps. I think that the one thread that goes through my writing is that it is political, and I really believe that stories are powerful and can make change. I think that's the only thing that sort of keeps me going, because I can't always write in the way that I want to during the times that I want to. And I was going to say something else, but I can't remember what I was going to say. Oh yeah, so I didn't get an MFA, so I didn't study like some specific kind of writing. I just sort of like taught myself. So there was never like that stream of identity for me. I think more than anything, I've written more for children than anything else. And to go back to Corie's question, I would say that if you want a great craft exercise for fiction, write a children's story. Because if you have to write a story in 700 words, you need to plot it, you need to like get those characters developed in 700 words, you need to establish a setting, and it just really strips you down to what makes a story. And it has to be poetic too, it has to be lyrical, because it's got to be written, you know, read out loud. And my 4-year-old is at the point right now where she listens to my stories, and she critiques them. She's a very sharp critic. And, you know, you think it's hard to please the New York Times, like try pleasing a 4-year-old, right? So I would say that writing children's books, whether you do it because you want those to be published or just as a craft exercise, is a really, really great exercise. The same way that I think writing poetry is a great exercise, even though none of my poems will ever be published. I think it just makes you think across genres and think in different ways, and think in, you know, as Corie was saying, like you think a lot about the way things sound and rhythms. And I think it really helps me at the sentence level to do poetry exercises. In fact, like one of the things that I try to do when I can't work on my books is I have this book, The Practice of Poetry, right here. And I do exercises from it when I like can't get into my book project.
Thank you both for sharing. We probably have time for one more question. So if anyone, you can unmute yourself or you can drop it in the chat.
You guys are being so awesome in the chat. Like, I feel like it's just like a love fest. Thank you.
Yeah, so we have a question for Mathangi. How do you teach yourself to write as somebody who...
It's a great question. So I mean, I'm still teaching myself to write. So I do right now that I'm back in the US. So I lived in India for 6 years. So there it was just a lot of, you know, they say the 10,000 hours is just putting in the hours to just keep practicing, and then to read, to just read really widely and to read really well-written books. Sometimes those are hard to find because sometimes the award winners are not always the best written books. I mean, most of the time they are, but like, I'm just saying, figure out what your taste is, figure out what books you think are good and what kind of authors you want to emulate. Another thing I've been doing since I've been back is I've been taking a lot of writing workshops. So I just did the Tin House workshop with Melissa Febos. I'm doing a Corie workshop this weekend. I've done Zoom workshops at Lighthouse when I'm still living in California, and I have also done workshops through Hugo House, and let me think where else I've done workshops through. But I just try to take a lot of workshops, and then I also, I read a lot of craft books too. So right now I'm reading, you can tell my desk is a mess because like everything I want to show you guys is like within reaching distance, but I'm reading A Stranger's Journey, which is David Morrow's craft book right now on race, identity, and narrative. And even if you're not a person of color, I think it's an amazing book. Like just the questions he asks have been really helpful for me. I do have kind of a complex about it. Like I'm not going to go back and get my MFA at this point. It's just not economically feasible. It's not, you know, it's just not something that I'm going to do. But I would say that if you don't have an MFA, there are ways to figure it out. And I think taking classes and just reading a lot, and then also going to readings and asking authors your questions. And also another thing that I did, and then I'll stop because I want Corie to have time to stop too. When I lived in New York 1,000 years ago as a 20-something, I was really involved in this group called the South Asian Women's Creative Collective, and I curated literary events. So I was basically calling authors to come read for us, And then I was moderating the event, so I just got to ask them whatever questions I had. So I asked them a whole bunch of crack questions after I read their books. So I think just trying to find opportunities for yourself to be around authors and to get to ask them questions and to take workshops. But I think the most important thing is just putting in the time and pushing yourself and just writing and writing and writing. And this is where, again, even if you can only write for half an hour a day, even if you can only write on weekends, like, it's enough. You don't have to write every single day.
So I don't have an MFA either, but I have done a lot of workshop work, and my experience teaching on the faculty at ASU did allow me to take a bunch of classes in their MFA. So like I was on the faculty at the law school teaching writing, but a friend of a friend had just finished an MFA and was teaching for the program, and she invited me to join. And so I have, I think, some insight into what those programs are like. And I was planning to potentially finish that degree there. But I ended up, I met my husband in Arizona, where it is 120 to 130 degrees on many days in the summer. And I had a faculty job, and I did not have to get dressed and go into a place of business when it was 130 degrees out, and he did. And he very much felt that that was not a way to live. And so we moved to Colorado, and I did not complete that MFA. And I have really mixed feelings about it, and sometimes also feel left out in a way of the conversation. At the same time, I think we tend to forget, like you go to a great Lighthouse event, or I did the book project experience at Lighthouse, and you're able to customize and choose things that are really helpful to you and hear from writers who really speak to you and be moved by those experiences, moved forward as well as moved internally. And an MFA is school. And that means, I mean, I'm sure there are people here with us today who've done them. That means that if you have to take a class in, writing, well, I'm really interested in writing the epic. So like, that would be great for me. But, 99% of people who I know are not interested in modernizing the epic form of poetry in their work or studying former, famous epics. And that would be dull for those people. And so I think you miss out on, it's sort of like the stamp of, I've committed to this world and I get to call myself by this label. But it doesn't necessarily mean anything beyond, it's sort of an artificial label. And I think some of the most successful writers I know are actually people who don't have MFAs, because I think they're able to control the voices in their heads. Like I have a handful of teachers who've really taught me things I have taken with me into the world. Some of the things are about writing in general. And some of the things, like I'm actually reading, I don't have it on my desk, I should have brought it in, but I'm reading Bob Haas's book, A Little Book on Form, which of course is like this big. I'm reading it now, and there's so much in there that he didn't ever say when I was his student. But the thing that I took from him when I was his student was really about the operation of the sentence and the line. And I think about that like every day. And I got to choose that experience as opposed to having experiences foisted upon me. So I try to think of not having an MFA as a good thing when I'm not like in the throes of personal anxiety or whatever it is that tells us we're supposed to have an MFA in order to be like a valid human. I don't think you need it. I could go on. Jennifer Egan doesn't have one. There are all these famous writers who don't have them. Not that being famous is itself the goal, but it's certainly having an MFA doesn't make or break you. I don't think. Andrew is agreeing.
I actually do think that sometimes not having an MFA is actually really good for your craft, because I think MFAs like teach you in a certain way. The thing that I have noticed is that people with MFAs, like any other kind of grad school, are like very connected. So at the beginning of my book tour, I felt like I didn't know anybody I was on tour with, and they all like, I mean, I wasn't on tour with them, but like, I'm not famous. So they would try and put me with someone who was like kind of famous at the event, so I wouldn't read to an empty room. And when I was by myself, I read to empty rooms. Like I literally had at least one event where nobody came, and my mom came to that event, and she was like, "This is what you do. This is why I have to take care of your kid, so you can read to literally empty rooms." So the only thing I would say about an MFA is, Corie, I don't know if you feel this way, but I feel like people who have MFAs, like their professors blurb their book and they can like call their friends to do events. And I think, especially as someone who lived abroad for like 6 years before my book came out, that was the main thing that made me feel like really insecure. I was like, oh, I don't know anybody. I don't have any friends. I'm like, you know?
So actually the advice that I got, I reached out to like some friends of friends in my network when I was publishing the book to try to figure out how to make this move into kind of the next step. And I got a lot of advice from people with MFAs who said things like, leverage your network, get your book into the courses taught by your friends from school. And so I have found that there are some hurdles. I also think that, I think getting read is a little bit easier for some folks. Like if you say, you know, you did Iowa or whatever, people will read your submission. I read, and I try not to be deferential to those kinds of credentials, but it's hard because you're swimming in an ocean of material at every level, I think, of submission. So I do think it can be helpful in that way. But I also think like some of the most talented writers I know who did MFAs, who were in the Arizona MFA when I was taking classes, didn't really go on to write anything substantial. I think partly because the MFA made them feel less confident. Because you're always in critique. And I also think partly because when the MFA ended, it was so abrupt and they lacked a community like the one that we all are fortunate to have and be part of. And so they didn't have the voices of their friends and teachers saying, you know, this matters, this is worthwhile. So I don't know. I mean, I think if someone's thinking about an MFA, then, you know, I'm not the right person to talk to.
But also no judgment.
No, none at all. I reference it all the time. I'm like, I'm going to get an MFA. And at a certain point, it's like, why? You know, maybe in a way, I feel like if I got an MFA, it would be to avoid doing the writing that I'm supposed to be doing, if that makes sense. It's like a writing adjacent activity that would make me feel like I was making progress. That's way less scary than writing something and putting it into the world to see what happens.
100%. 100%.
Corie, Mathangi, thank you so much. Thank you for your readings tonight. We really appreciate them. And thank you for your thoughtful, this discussion was great. We really appreciate the time and the thought that you put into your questions. And so thank you.
Thank you guys. Thanks, Manuel. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
It's fabulous.
Well, take care, everybody, and we will see you again soon. Have a lovely weekend.
You too. Thank heavens for Lighthouse.
Thank heavens for Lighthouse.
Good job, you guys. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. Just wonderful.
I'm so glad I got to catch like just the last little bit. I was just like, yes, they're running over. Yeah.
I was trying not to talk and talk. So
no, don't ever try.